Stress related to the workplace continues to plague quite a number of workers, and efforts to exit pandemic-related restrictions have some remote workers dreading the return to normality within the office. For more, I have visiting Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University. It's a pleasure to see you again, Professor An.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Won Eun-soo from Cha University. It's good to see you again, Professor Won.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Won, we'll start with you then. Let's start with a few words on the presence of stress prompted by interactions with people within the workplace.
Okay, so if we talk about work-related stress, the major contributing factors to work-related stress can be workload, which is too much work, or juggling between work and your private life, or the lack of job insecurity. But last but not least is the interpersonal relationship issues. And also in Korea, we have a unique workplace culture, which is 회식, which is actually an after-hours gathering, which mostly consists of drinking alcohol. And although a majority of people wouldn't mind an occasional gathering amongst co-workers, if these gatherings are too frequent, that itself becomes a major stress factor, as many see that kind of gathering as an extension of work, and some people don't even like to drink. So it's normally as senior staff that instigates such excessive gatherings, and it's very uncomfortable and awkward to say no if you're a junior staff. Partly because you feel guilty because the other co-workers are actually reluctantly going. Also, you can be afraid that your senior or boss might not like you, or you might be isolated from the workplace because you're not participating. And many times when there is a boss that creates a workplace environment where you're not assessed for your working abilities and your diligence, but how well you abide by the personal requests of your seniors, such as joining in for after-hours drink, there is a high possibility that workplace environment has other toxic aspects of it, like poor communication, triangulation, or even favoritism, etc. So I've heard many express how their work environments can be toxic. And the one good thing about this pandemic was they could socially distance themselves from these toxic bosses and co-workers without quitting the job.
Right. And Professor An, in response to this reality that Professor Won has just mentioned, workplace counselling apparently is an option being adopted by local firms especially amid the pandemic. Is there a legal support framework for such adoptions?
Well, as Professor Won has mentioned that there's many issues, and there's the workplace stress is more like generated by the human relations, right? It's a human factor which is not easy to fix with the legal or institutional system. So it's like you have to think about how we gonna change our working environment or the culture there, right? And currently there's no actual specific provision on point to dealing with the work-related stresses, but the companies are handling by themselves internally by internal policies. I think that's the time for the Korean government to take a step to modernize Korean labor and employment law in the post COVID-19 era. I think there's time to time to move on.
Time to move on. Professor, staying with that, I hear Germany is therefore seeking a law to give people the legal right then to work from home. Now, tell us a bit more about this effort, and what are your thoughts on the feasibility of such a law being implemented here in Korea?
It's a very interesting question because I've been asking myself, do we need it, right? Actually, in German, I think that's in 2013, they introduced a policy, kind of, many policies about the remote worker, how to deal with it, right to disconnect, basically they call it, and then it means that you can contact employers cannot contact employees off hour, right? After the contracted hours, if you're the contract, employees, right? So that's kind of issue, and also that you have to think about other countries, European, like Spain, like I think they're transforming into 4 working day from the 5 working day. Actually, personally, I had a student from Spain, and we discussed about issue. And I was personally surprised to hear that the many the workers in Spain do not like 4 days working schedule because they got salary reduction.
I see.
So there's always pro and con. Also, we have to think about it. About the right to work remote. Is it about talking about reduction of working hours, or it says reduction of the working salary also. So many things are correlated, economic factors. So when you need to get really carefully approach it, how we're gonna manage it, because that when in the table, in negotiation table, the other side is employer, whether how they take it. That's the really social issue, right? Economic issue as well.
Right. And going back to the idea of having a legal right to work from home, what are your thoughts, Professor An, on such a plan here in Korea, such a law that is?
Well, besides the legality issue, legal issue, I think that it's kind of it's a new global trend. It's like becoming new norm as a post-pandemic situation, because then for me personally, I'm teaching in the Zoom, the online lecture for the last 2 years. In the beginning, I thought it was, it's crazy. How can you do online lecture, right? And after 2 years, I found something very positive side of online lectures. It's very interesting. Ironically, I feel much closer to the student.
Would you care to explain that? How do you feel closer to your students
because
when you're teaching them virtually?
When you do actually offline lecture, you have a physical distance, at least maybe 2 or 3 meters. You don't talk to the same person for 5 minutes, actually, because many people waiting in the line, and very quick Q&A, and then you contact me. I got office hour. Nobody show up, because they're busy, they're studying, they're working. So, but since I'm switched to online, and more people actually come to the office hour, it's easier, convenient. They don't have to come to, see, for me, I have to travel like 2 hours back and forth for the 1 hour of business, office hour, and don't have to come to the class or the office hour, spending like commuting like only for the office hour, like 2 hours or something. So, but I think, and then plus, it's much more feel convenient to talk, online. It's very ironic, but I think that I found some bright side of the, but in the future maybe you might have a hybrid, education system somehow,
a blend of offline and online.
I think some universities talking about hybrid model as well.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Won, going back to our topic then, has there been an actual surge then in the number of office workers seeking professional medical assistance, attention for work-induced stress?
Yes, well, we spend the majority of time at work, even more so than at home. So work-related stress can be more damaging than stress we receive from our personal lives. And so yes, a lot of people do seek treatment for insomnia, depression and anxiety, which has been caused by work-related stress. And although a large proportion of the patients who do complain of work-related stress, they complain of working too much, long hours, and also having to do work that requires high emotional involvement, or work or job insecurity as well, and also having to work and take care of the kids at the same time. So those are the components. But also, I have a lot of patients who complain of workplace bullying as well. And in a way, that kind of stress is more detrimental because it's man-made and it's unnecessary stress, because if the bully chooses not to engage in that kind of behavior, that stress doesn't have to exist. And I've seen victims say that they felt very betrayed by the workplace itself, because it's very difficult systematically to actually put in a complaint towards the bully. And even if the complaint does go into HR, a lot of times it's swept under the rug, because workplaces, they tend not to want problematic situations to surface. And also, a lot of times HR needs evidence, like hard evidence, to actually take actions against the bullies. So when the workplace bullying consists of straight out shouting or cursing or even physical abuse, which does really happen even now, maybe it would be easier to get evidence from that, because you can record the situation, etc. But when the bullying is subtle, as for you're being ostracized, or your work is being invalidated, or you have unequal opportunities due to favoritism, or someone's smear campaigning you, all of that is very difficult to prove. So as this kind of stress accumulates, not only can it cause mental health issues, but it can actually affect your physical health, because stress in your immune system is intertwined quite deeply. So I'm sure you've seen co-workers who had been under a lot of pressure become physically ill and leave and had to take sick leave, and which leads to the disruption of work. And also, in the workplace's point of view, that's monetary loss. So work-related stress does not only influence the employees, individual employees, but also the workplace as a whole.
Given that reality, Professor Won, would you say that resignation is a viable option to the problem then? Because you did mention the toxic environment, and it would be only wise for you to try to escape such an environment. And if that included resigning from your job, would that be a solution, do you think?
Right. Well, a lot of people do choose that solution, but in my opinion, the after effects of that kind of work-related stress doesn't just disappear because you quit your job, because you've already been influenced mentally and physically. So you may have lingering symptoms of depression, or you may have developed a sense of self-doubt, or you may have built up mistrust in the workplace system at whole. And some people even say that they've actually lost the urge to continue to work. So if you are in that kind of state, I mean, it is really helpful to find resources that may get you through this difficult time, rather than just, say, okay, I quit, this is the end. Many times it doesn't work that way.
And resources would be reaching out to people like yourself, of course.
Yes, myself, or even non-MD counsellors as well, or even reaching out to family and friends and sharing what they're going through. That's a big help as well.
Right. Professor An, back in 2019, given the concerns raised by Professor Won, Korea introduced legislation to root out harassment within the workplace. How effective has this introduction been?
Well, I mean, from the legal perspective, right, that's only 2-year-old, right? So, well, whenever we have new policy, something really big policy takes time and means that you need to get amendments, revise it. But generally speaking, in terms of the enforceability of any regulation, government regulation, there's always major issues such as the ambiguity and also the applicable scope, right? So in terms of ambiguity, I mean, the Korean version of the Workplace Harassment Act, right? So basically, it's not clear about there's ambiguous provisions such as how you define it, harassment, right? Can we do more specified? I mean, can you get more specified? I think you can specify the provisions, something like that. In the U.S. cases, and they have a specified, I think that's well drafted. The language itself. For example, they included the cases, comma, more specific. And for example, like the one thing I noticed that from U.S. regulation is about they talk about the religion issue also. So if the boss is language A, not religion A, and you're religion B, and you not force, but you need to go to some activity, something you don't want to do it because against your religion's belief or something like that. So I think that's things in the U.S. is more problem. More social issue than Korea, but we're developing that issue right now. So I think that we need to amend it, revise it, more closely reflecting the reality of the workplace.
Right. Going back to something that you mentioned earlier, Professor An, there are new labor laws in Portugal as well. They make it illegal for an employer to contact an employee after office hours. What are the chances of such a regulation here in Korea?
I guess it's very slim because the social, corporate culture, right? When you have, it's about enforceability. You can make any law, beautiful law, but if you cannot enforce it, what's the point of the law, right? So I think that most people generally agree on the idea about right to disconnect, the European style. However, in reality in Korea, we consider the very unique corporate culture, right? Getting together, and plus a lot of work is project basis. It's like your team project, so it's you need to work together, and then teamwork is a very big factor in the working project. But I think from my experience, when I work at the law firm, is the way system work is the billable hour system. You individual person work on different projects, but on the billing system. But most of other non-legal field is about the actual. You talk about office hour, working hour, but some professional field, they talk about the billable hour, something very much flexible. So you can come in late, at 11 a.m., but you work late, 3 a.m. You can do anytime you want it, as long as you keep the deadline. So I think it's more
flexible.
Yeah, very flexible. I think there's things that we need to work. It's not about only the legal system, it's a more corporate system, culture, work on more independent project basis and let people more flexibility and more efficiency. I say more efficiency, yeah. I think that's the more important, right?
Right. And I was wondering, Professor Wan, do you have students reaching out to you after work hours as well? We're talking about employers not being able to reach their employees, should not be reaching their employees after office hours. What about for you as a professor?
Right. Actually, I'm actually a professor as well, but I'm actually in the global marketing department of our hospital as well. And yes, to be honest, we do contact each other after hours. There's situations where it's inevitable. So
right, it is. In the media as well. So
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Professor Wan, I'd like to now direct your attention then away from the victim and towards the aggressor, so to speak. What are some of the typical traits of the aggressor?
Okay. So bullies have common characteristics such as lack of empathy. They're exploitative. They're antagonistic. They have poor boundary issues. They're vindictive. They're easily angered. And they're controlling. And they're entitled. So people with these tendencies, they tend to not care about the pain they inflict on their victims. And they think they're allowed to do as they please. But they can also be very charming, so very manipulative. So they can easily get away with their bad behaviors. And we describe people with such a cluster of characteristics to be narcissistic. And most narcissistic people have a crave for power. So they're likely in high positions. So you're likely to meet a narcissistic boss than a boss with other characteristics. And often narcissists are exempt from disciplinary actions in the workplace for various reasons. But first of all, they're actually often productive, normally by exploiting other people, because they crave power. And in order to have that power, they make profit for their workplace at any cost. So, and workplaces tend to not want to lose that kind of productivity. So they often look the other way.
It's like looking at a character from a movie.
Yes, but if you look around you, there are many people with these characteristics. I mean, there can be like characteristics could be small, and the characteristics can be strong, but there are people with these characteristics very often.
And so how can these victims seek to better protect themselves and psychologically?
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to get to that, but I just have a few other things I want to tell you. And also, I wanted to explain why these perpetrators, these bullies can get away from the situation. And it's also because even, because they're very antagonistic, right? And if they think that the workplace is out to get to them, they will fight, and they will fight with all their might. And when they fight dirty. And in the HR's point of view, it's much difficult to handle a narcissistic bully than to handle the victim. So HR, many times choose the easier way out. So back to the question you just asked me. So a few things you can do for yourself in situations where taking formal actions against the bully is difficult is, first of all, don't personalize the bully's behaviors, because many times the perpetrators gaslight their victims into thinking that it's their fault the bullying is happening. It's because they're inadequate, they're weak, they're incompetent, and the workplace doesn't need them. Any sort of bullying is wrong. And it's actually important to acknowledge that it's actually the unhealthy personality characteristics of the bullies that this problematic situation is taking place. And try to protect yourself by documenting everything possible. Emails and texts related to work, especially if that bully is related to the texts and emails, because there might come a point where you need objective evidence to prove that this was your work and acclaim your work, or also not take the fall for the mistakes of other people. And there is also a high possibility that a bully may outlast you at work, because, as I said, when they fight dirty. But a lot of times people try to withstand such abuse. As you know, you don't want to quit a job that you work so hard for because of a narcissistic bully. but many times they quit at the very last moment in a very emotional and impulsive state because they can't take it anymore, and they tend to walk out with nothing and no preparations. So rather than doing so, especially if you're in a workplace that isn't doing anything for you to get out of that situation, quietly prepare an escape plan. And that could be like another job option. And even if that job pays less, a non-toxic, supportive work environment will do you much good, what money cannot do, and which includes enhancing your well-being, physical and mental well-being.
Right. And Professor, and how can we legally respond to such a scenario, in your opinion?
Actually, Professor, mentioned a very interesting point about in terms of a legal perspective, right? Is evidence very important. So how you build the evidence is very critical when you say, let's say you have a litigation or anything, file a complaint, right? So one of the things about here, for example, right, in Korea, it's illegal to record your conversation, but which is not legal in many countries, right? So a lot of things, you're building up evidence is very important, and you understand at the same time, the evidence can be a double-edged sword. It can bite you back. So you have to be very careful how to select evidence, but you're recording perhaps evidence, but also the harassment, there's have to minimum level of harassment, which is allowed by the law, right? Prohibited by the law, right? So you need to know that is that the level of harassment is sufficient, legally sufficient to be recognized by law. That's the things you have to ask yourself, and then you can ask, HR department, is it really the level? Is adequate level? Is to find out not only subjectively, they have to be objectively, agreed by that group. Even the HR group will say, well, that's the level exceeded. So there are things you need to carefully look at yourself and how things happens, right? So collecting evidence and then find out the minimum level. That's very important.
Seeking legal advice as well, then.
Yeah.
All right, Professor, and as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Won, it's been a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you.